Well, it's a special treat for me to be here. My name's James Whitford, and this is the True Charity Initiative is a work of Water to Gardens Gospel Rescue Mission that my wife and I co-founded 17 years ago, and learned a lot along the way. We took some hard knocks, you might say, in the learning curves of trying to help people who were in need in the first few years. But a lot of people don't know this, but the ministry actually started right out of this church, and so it's a special opportunity for me to be here and stepping in here and just remembering many times at the altar and seeking God's direction and what He would want us to do, and probably should have sought Him more about how to do it. Right? That was, but the Lord's been good, and so maybe just I'll open with a word of prayer tonight. Okay? So God, I just want to thank You. It's an honor to be here. You have been so good in so many ways, and what You've done in this community, how You've used Your people as instruments, vessels that You've filled, and then called to be poured out to those in need. And we're grateful to be here in this place tonight and in Your presence. And we just want to hear from You. What is it that You would have us to do, and really the how-to. How would You have us help people who are in need? So we turn our hearts to You. We turn our attention to You. We know that You have all the answers, and that's the truth. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So that was great. I got to pray in my old church. I love that. So this book, The Tragedy of American Compassion, I think there might be one left for sale out there, but The Tragedy of American Compassion, written by Marvin Olasky in the mid 90s, was very instrumental in a lot of the welfare reform that took place in the mid 90s. So this book was read widely on Capitol Hill by many legislators as they were looking at how to reform welfare where it would be better than what it was. The Tragedy of American Compassion. Now, I'm going to refer to this book and read from it a number of times along the way in the next hour, because what we're going to talk about tonight are the 7 marks of effective charity. There's one chapter in the book where Marvin Olasky outlines 7 marks of compassion. We've developed a relationship with the author, and I told him I want to call them 7 marks of effective charity instead. And he said that's fine. So, but we will refer to the book a number of times through the evening. And so I'm just going to be reading some passages. Now, that particular URL right there, if you were to write that down in all of its caps in small letters, it would take you to a review that I wrote of the book so that you could kind of get a better feel for the flavor of this author and his writing. I do want to make sure that everybody has a handout. In fact, Alice, I might take one if there's one left. Is that yours? No. Okay, thank you. So I've just created some note boxes for you, and we're going to go through all 7 marks, and it does go through A through G is the way that works. And I think what I'll do is just share a story with you that will illustrate these. Now, typically, family, I will spend 7 hours teaching 7 marks of effective compassion, preferably not in all one setting. But if we were going to do it, we would typically do this over 7 weeks, and we would spend an hour on each one. So this is just an overview of these, but very important for us to be able to practice charity, I think, the way that God wants us to. I think you'll be engaged. You're going to learn some things. I hope you have a pen or a pencil. If not, shake one from your neighbor. All right, so I want to tell you about a guy named John to begin with. So John, years ago, I was just working what we call care coordination, but it's kind of like case management, sitting down, meeting people, getting to know them, really investigating a little bit, asking some questions, being willing to set some goals with people, dig in a little bit, right? And so John's sitting down, and I'm just talking with him, and I said, so where's your family? He's like, yeah. I said, no, really? Where's your family, John? He says, well, my mom and my sister, they're in California. And I said, well, when's the last time you talked with your mom? Geez, it's been so long, And I said, well, why don't I try to call her? What's her number? Oh, I don't know her number. What was the town? So he tells me the town. What's her name? He remembers her name. Good son, right? And and what do? Well, I look it right up on White Pages, and I say, well, you think this is it? And he's like, yeah, I bet that's my mom. I said, well, do you mind if I call her? He's like, yeah. So I call her up. I say, hey, Mom, I got your son right across the desk. Yeah, John, your son. Would you? Well, sure, yeah. She wants to talk to him, right? And then she's weeping. And he's like, Mom? So he thought he'd burnt a bridge that was irreparable, but it wasn't the case. And the next thing you know, his sister has bought a plane ticket, flying into Joplin, comes to our mission, embraces him, flies him back home again. The reason I tell you that story is because it would have been really easy for me to say, John, what do you need? And for John to say, I need this. I need some money. I need some food. And for me to go, okay, here you go. Rather than to ask first this question, who's more closely affiliated with John, who might be better at really helping him with what he needs? So the first mark of effective charity is affiliation. And you'll see the A on your worksheet there. So you can just fill that in. It's affiliation. And and then you'll notice it says affiliation that has the word is, and then there's a blank. And so for each one of these marks, I'm going to kind of give you the summary of what affiliation is to do, or what each mark is to do. Affiliation is to explore existing relationships. So that's it. You want to just put it really simple, okay? We're going to give you 7 marks like this, and you'll be able to put these into practice in how you help people, whether it's the guy on the street who's holding a sign, or whether it's somebody down at the mission that you're connecting with, or maybe it's a neighbor or even a family member who's become unhealthily dependent on you. So affiliation is to explore existing relationships. And now I just want to read a short paragraph. The neat thing about Marvin Olasky's writing is he's really a historian. He just unveils so much history. A lot of the comments and the quotes that you'll read in this book are from 100 or more years ago, back before the state was as involved in helping people as much as the church was. And so you really get a good flavor for the way things maybe used to be. It says here on page 102 concerning affiliation, in practice, when individuals or families with real needs applied for material assistance, charity workers began by interviewing applicants and checking backgrounds in order to answer one question: who is bound to help in this case? Can you imagine that? Rather than you, the church worker or the charity worker or the mission worker or the social worker, thinking, I'm the one who's supposed to help, maybe first asking, who is bound to help in this case? Charity workers then tried to call in relatives, neighbors, or former co-workers and co-worshipers. Quote, relief given without reference to friends and neighbors is accompanied by moral loss. Mary Richmond of the Baltimore Charity Organization Society noted. Quote, poor neighborhoods are doomed to grow poorer and more sordid whenever the natural ties of neighborliness are weakened by our well-meant but unintelligent interference. When material support was needed, charities tried to raise it from relatives and others with personal ties instead of appropriating funds from the general income. Quote, raising the money required specially on each case, though very troublesome, has immense advantages, one minister wrote. It enforces family ties and neighborly or other duties instead of relaxing them. So that's a little on affiliation from the book. Now, this is very closely related to the principle of subsidiarity. So there's a note box there, and you can make notes inside of that. And I just, you can't pass through affiliation without talking about this. Subsidiarity, one definition is an organizing principle that matters ought to be handled by the smallest, lowest, or least centralized competent authority. Subsidiarity is a Catholic social teaching principle. It's been around for a very long time. We'll talk a little bit about its history. But I really think it's a natural thing that God intends. Here's another definition. The Oxford English Dictionary defines it as the idea that a central authority should have a subsidiary function, performing only those tasks which cannot be performed effectively at a more immediate or local level. This is important when we're talking about affiliation and family ties, because if you have a larger, more bureaucratic, centralized organization helping your family member or your neighbor that's in need, it very well could crowd you out or crowd that affiliation out of the picture. It was first introduced, well, this guy came up with it, this good-looking guy, Oswald von Neubrunnen, a German sociologist in the early 1900s, came up with this concept of subsidiarity. But it first actually came out in writing in an encyclical that Pope Pius, I think it was the 11th, wrote, Quadragesimo Anno. And so what I want to do is, actually, Alice, I've got some of these too. Would you mind passing these out? I have to hang on to one. I'm going to remember this time. See if there's enough to circulate. Quadragesimo Anno, it means the 40th year. And in this text, he introduces the concept, not the word subsidiarity, but he introduces the concept of subsidiarity. As you get that, you'll notice on the sheet there's, like in paragraph 79, there's a bolded line. So I've bolded that for you. That's not how it is in the original, but I've bolded that for you because I think it really is the part that illustrates the importance of subsidiarity and affiliation. So I'm going to read that bolded section to you in paragraph 79 of Quadragesimo Anno. It says, just as it is gravely wrong to take from individuals what they can accomplish by their own initiative and industry and give it to the community, so also it is an injustice and at the same time a grave evil and disturbance of right order to assign to a greater and higher association what lesser and subordinate organizations can do. So let me just read that last part again. It is an injustice and at the same time a grave evil and disturbance of right order to assign to a greater and higher association what lesser and subordinate, think neighbors, can do. Now, it comes out again in Caritas and Veritate, which is charity and truth. And Charity and Truth was written by Pope Benedict. And we are, if you'll flip your paper over, actually, yeah, it's right there. So paragraph 57, and here we actually have the word being used. And this is 2009. And so I'll just read the bold to you. Subsidiarity, this is paragraph 57. Subsidiarity is first and foremost a form of assistance to the human person via the autonomy of intermediate bodies. Such assistance is offered when individuals or groups are unable to accomplish something on their own. That's a key point. And it's always designed to achieve their emancipation because it fosters freedom and participation through assumption of responsibility. Subsidiarity respects personal dignity by recognizing in the person a subject who is always capable of giving something to others. Oh, what if our charity was about that? Recognizing that every person we help has the capacity to actually be someone who helps other people. By considering reciprocity as the heart of what it is to be a human being, subsidiarity is the most effective antidote against any form of all-encompassing welfare state. So the principle of affiliation and this idea of subsidiarity is incredibly important for us to consider, and I would say adhere to, as we practice charity. So down at the bottom, you will note your worksheet, it says True Charity Works, I think, at the bottom right there, underneath that square of affiliation notes, right? And so with each one of these marks, I just want to summarize a little bit. True charity works, right? True charity works to do this. True charity works to consider who is the right and primary source of help. So if we're talking about affiliation, that is what, if you put that into practice, then your true charity will work to do that. True charity works to consider who is the right and primary source of help. Okay, I'm going to tell you another story. I got a call just a week ago from a lady named Jocelyn. And she actually called my wife. My wife's phone's ringing. My wife's cooking. Praise Jesus, she's cooking. And I'd still be living on frozen burritos if it wasn't for that grand lady. And so she's cooking, she's busy, and the phone's ringing, and so I pick it up and I say, "Hey, Jocelyn, how you doing?" "Oh, hi, James. What's going on?" "Oh, I just wanted to call and say hi." Incredibly casual conversation, just wanting to connect. Which was so strange when you think about where she was, say, 7-8 years ago. A meth addict on the streets that had really... It was in a hopeless situation. She had literally lived in a cardboard box on Skid Row with her child at one point. Left California, thought that she could get away from the drugs in Southwest Missouri. That didn't happen, right? So things just spiraled out of control. The police could recognize this lady a mile away. She was so much trouble. Got assigned 400 hours of community service at our mission. More than she still holds the first place prize. But during that time, we developed a relationship with Jocelyn. We bonded with her. She didn't have good family connection. And that's your second mark of effective charity, is bonding. So, and now she just calls us and wants to talk and say, hey, and we have this relationship. And what's really great, she's been clean for years, went on to get her bachelor's degree, then went on to get her master's degree, and is now licensed as a counselor. It's an amazing story of transformation. But it happened because we were willing to develop relationships. So bonding is the second mark of effective charity. Let's see here. Bonding is to build real relationships. That's simple. We're talking about building real relationships with people. So you can write that in the line. Bonding is to build real relationships. Reading from the text. When adult applicants for help were truly alone, then it was time for bonding with volunteers who, in essence, became new family members. Charity volunteers a century ago usually were not assigned to paper pushing or mass food dispensing tasks, but were given the opportunity to make a large difference in several lives over several years. The key was personal willingness to become deeply involved. Charity's review paid close attention to language abuse and stressed the importance of understanding, quote, charity in its original meaning of love, not charity in its debased meaning of alms. Built into the word charity really is this idea of bonding. So I want to talk a little bit about this word compassion. Because if you're going to bond with someone, it's because you care. And if you care, it's probably because you felt compassion for the person. So let's just talk about the word for a moment. Here's a definition that I don't want you to write down. The definition is sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. It's not my definition. I found that, but I don't think that's a very good one. Let's try this one. The response to the suffering of others that motivates a desire to help. Now, I think that's a better definition of compassion. It's going to drive you to do something. But the response itself is not the what you do. The response is what you feel. Because compassion is an emotion. Compassion is not something that you do. Compassion is an emotional response. It's evoked from you when you are in the presence of someone who is broken and in need and hurting. And there's something, a divine capacity in every single human, I believe, to feel it. I don't think you've got to be a Christian. I think as a person made in the image of a compassionate God, you can feel that. And it is what drives us to do something. Consider the word a little more closely. The Latin is compassus. This is a compound for cum passus, which means suffer, to suffer with. This is the kind of thing that it drives you to do, to bear someone's burden, to suffer with them. The Greek is splanknexomai. The Greek literally means from the gut. It's dealing with something visceral. Again, this is not something you think. You can think you're going to be compassionate, but the truth is it's elicited from you. When Jesus was in the midst of the multitude who were in need and hungry, he felt compassion, didn't he? And then it drove him to do something. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Something from the gut, compassion is. So here's compassion, and it's going to drive you to do something, and it drives many of you to do something right now. But what we want to get to is justice. And so I just want to tell you that I think this word is a tricky word, okay? And it has many different meanings. But let's just try to keep it really simple. Ken Witzma wrote a book called Pursuing Justice, and in it he talks about truth pertaining to what is, and justice pertaining to what ought to be, right? If things are going to be justified, they are being made as they ought to be, as God originally intended them to be. Now, I know you and I and every other mission worker in the United States and around the globe who feels compassion, wants the compassion to ignite them to do something that's going to result in justice. Things being as God intended them to be in the lives of people who are not living lives or are in the middle of something that God has not intended for them. How can we be justifiers in the earth today? Well, our compassion is the fuel. Justice is the destination. But we've got to have a vehicle. And I really love this cool little vehicle. I don't know what that thing is, but I want one of those. But you've got to have a vehicle. And so I want to try to put it all in line for you. That's charity. So don't contrast charity and justice in a way that, oh, well, justice is what we should be doing and charity is not good because charity is just a handout. It's not. Charity is love in action. Charity is the outflow of compassion. It's the vehicle, and compassion is the fuel. But what we really are talking about today when we talk about the 7 marks of effective charity, hidden in that topic tonight is the truth that there is also an ineffective charity. So your vehicle could be this, right? And the truth is that's just not going to get you to making things as they ought to be for anybody. And that's why we're here tonight, because so much charity that's going on in our nation today and stuff that our government is doing in an attempt to help people is actually ineffective charity, never yielding the results that are intended. We have to change what we're doing. We have to rethink what we're doing. Does anybody remember the ad? What is that? Okay, it's not super glue, it's close. Crazy glue, yeah, it's a crazy glue ad. So when I was thinking about Bonnie, I was like, yeah, there's that crazy glue ad. And I remembered it. I don't know how high I was when they had that commercial out, but you know what I couldn't remember? I couldn't remember if the guy put the glue on the hat or if he put it on the beam. All I remember is that he's hanging from his hat and he's hanging from the beam. You remember the commercial, some of you. But the fact that I couldn't remember whether he put the glue on the hat or if he put the glue on the beam makes my point. Bonding is not a one-way thing. When people are bonded, both are mutually involved. This should elicit the thought of reciprocity and mutuality. Because we're not bonding one way. That's an impossibility. Bonding is a two-way thing all the time. And I think that's really important when we talk about healthy charity work. So let's complete the bottom line on bonding. True charity works to build real and lasting relationships. That's what we're doing here. True charity works to build real and lasting relationships. This is a mentoring tool of sorts that I've created over the last year plus called Life Deck. And I've just finished it, and they're actually for sale in the foyer. But Life Deck takes you and another person through 40 weeks of real relationship building as you go through different topics of life. And so if you're, it's just so, sometimes it's hard to know, how do I get involved with a person? Well, here's a way you can sit down once a week with some questions and activities and different things and help you build a real relationship. So I encourage you to look at Life Deck, and you can go to lifedeck.us as well. The reason I created this is because we have 700 volunteer shifts coming through the mission every month, and it's awfully hard to see the next step taken of relationship development. We have people serving food and doing all the mass food dispensing tasks and the mass clothes dispensing tasks and people coming down and volunteering. But what we really need is real relationships to be developed, because the transference of the gospel of Jesus Christ is absolutely vital if we're going to resolve issues of poverty in people's lives. And you are the carriers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is God's plan, for us to build relationships with people that we don't know. That's his plan. So I've created a tool that I hope will help with that. It's biblically based. Okay, so I think I'm going to tell you another story now. I couldn't remember this guy's name. I keep thinking it's going to come to me, but it hasn't yet. Young man, and he's upstairs in our learning center, and I walk up there, and he's just sitting there. I said, hey, what are you doing up here? Well, they wanted me to do whatever. He was been in our worth shop. We have a worth shop. We call it a worth shop because we believe that work awakens worth in people's lives. So folks at our mission earn things they need. And so he was assigned to do something for some clothes that he needed. He had picked out the clothes, but he hadn't taken them yet because he hadn't done his work yet. So he's supposed to be earning his clothes, and he said, I don't want to do what you guys told me I needed to do. I said, well, are you able to do it? Well, yeah, but I don't want to. I said, okay, you don't have to. You're a free man. If you want to leave, you can leave, or if you want to do what we've asked you to do, you can take the clothes. What would you like to do? And he left, and he didn't take the clothes. And that's okay. What's interesting about that is that had he gone somewhere where they just hand out clothes, guess what they would have done? They would have given him clothes. But the truth is that this young man categorized himself into a category of not needing the relief. We applied what's called a work test. That's what we do. And he categorized himself, and that's the next one, categorization. Categorization is mark number 3. Categorization is to determine whether a person is truly in need of relief. That is the purpose. Okay? Categorization is to determine whether a person is truly in need of relief. Let me read just a short section here. Work tests. Well, how would agencies know the categories into which applicants fell? Background checks helped, but work tests were a key self-sorting device. Self-sorting. And one that also allowed dispensing aid while retaining dignity. By 1890, Gertein's recommendations were accepted throughout the United States. When an able-bodied man in almost any city asked an agency for relief, he often was asked to chop wood for 2 hours or to whitewash a building. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Whenever I read that, I say, no, we're not looking at giving axes to people at the mission so they can chop wood. No, And we're not going to do chainsaws either, but we do think it's an important idea to apply work tests for the self-categorization. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how this plays out. Imagine this is a person that's whole and complete in every way, which is not any of us, right? It's not many of us. It's not any of us. None of us are whole and complete in every way. And I'm also glad that we're not really that round, aren't you? So we're not complete in every way. In fact, in every single one of us, there are some set of imperfections. These imperfections can be physical, they could be cognitive, they could be behavioral, right? And those imperfections in us result in some dysfunction. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but there's not a one of us here who are operating at 100%. We're just not. There's something wrong in every single one of us in some capacity that results in some level of dysfunction. That's humanity, okay? So the problem is that government programs, they focus in on that. And unfortunately, charitable programs focus in on this too. So a person comes in the door, what do you need? I need this. And immediately there's this, well, why? Because I'm dysfunctional. Well, tell me about it. And all of a sudden everybody's focusing on the dysfunction. I call that dysfunction-based categorization. So dysfunction-based categorization asks, what can't you do? And what don't you have? It's means tested, which actually is a lack of means, right? That's really what we're talking about when we hear the term means tested. We're looking at a lack of means. It's income centered and it's illness focused. Focusing in on the dysfunction, focusing in on what's wrong, what a person can't do, their incapacity, their disability. This is dysfunction-based categorization. We can categorize you. We can give you something because of your dysfunction. That's a categorization. And if you're not dysfunctional, we're not going to give you, right? But what I really think is important for us to consider is that maybe we should think about a different kind of categorization. Oh, by the way, it's really important to understand that whenever this is the case, whenever dysfunction is measured and correlates with what it is that a person's going to receive, there's no way to avoid incentivizing the magnification of that dysfunction, period. Now, I'm not saying that a person's going to magnify their dysfunction every time they come in the door, but I am telling you that there is a natural tendency for the incentivizing of magnifying that dysfunction if what a person receives when they come to you in need is based on some sliding scale proportional to the size of their dysfunction. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's important to understand. There's no way you're going to avoid incentivizing that. But I say, what about this? Why are we not thinking over here, right? I mean, there's a whole person over here that I think we sometimes ignore. And when we focus in on that, then we're talking about what I call function-based categorization. Function-based categorization asks, what can you do? And what do you have? It's work tested, right? We just talked about that, what I call challenge model. And let me tell you, my background as a physical therapist has proven to me this two-word sentence is always true. Challenge develops. I mean, if you want to know, if you just want to remember that, challenge develops. If you and I are going to get out of cyclic relief in helping people, where it's just food and clothing, relief, we're going to have to remember that challenge develops. Challenge is good. And it's production-centered and it's goal-focused. Okay, so true charity works, if you want to write this in the bottom line, to determine that a person is willing to help himself. That's what true charity is doing. True charity works to determine that a person is willing to help himself. You and I need to make sure we're thinking about that. Now just think about how you can apply these. I hope we get through all 7. Just think about how you can apply what we've already learned. To the person holding the sign on the corner that says, we'll work for food, but they want cash. How do you respond now? Where's your family? Do you have a brother or sister I could connect you to? No? Well, how about you and I sit down and talk a little bit, right? Let's develop a little bit of a relationship. Meet me over at the McDonald's. Sound good? Okay, now what's going on and you need what? And okay, well, you know what? This is what I'm needing. Would you be able to help me with that, right? And there we are. We're applying a work test. I mean, these are things you and I can do every day that are going to be a part of changing our city. Okay. So let's see here. I had years ago, so, it was probably 3 years into the mission, so about 2003. But there's just this one thing. You know how there are like triggers in life, and you go, man, I'll never forget that. It was like a turning point where we learned something very valuable. And this guy comes in, and he was like our trigger point, and he had a cervical soft collar on, so he's got a big white neck brace, and he walks in. And back in those days, it's like me and my wife, Marcia, kind of running the show. And you have a handful of volunteers, and that's it. It's a pretty small little outreach center at that point. And he comes up, my wife's sitting at the desk, and he says, I need some help. And she goes, okay, well, what can I help you with? And he says, well, you see, I've broken my neck, and I'm paralyzed from the neck down. Well, he'd walked in. He walked in. So my wife's a pretty smart gal, She'd been around the block. But the point was, I don't remember how the rest of the conversation went, but I know we didn't help him that day. And he walked out the door, and I remember thinking, where does he go next? And does he get in a wheelchair next time? I don't know. Better yet, from where did he come? Had somebody already engaged this guy? See, if we knew more about what was going on with that man, we may have engaged him differently and maybe could have been able to help him. Maybe we could have said, yeah, we knew maybe you were coming. Have a seat. We want to talk with you, right? We could have engaged him in a different way that could have been more helpful. If we had more information, it would have helped us to discern. So discernment is the next mark. So discernment, and we're not talking about a spiritual discernment, although pray for that, because that's always right on, and it's something that you need, right? But there's also just a discernment that comes from having more information, and that's really important as well. So discernment is, write this in the top, to gather as much information as possible to determine the best help for another. To gather as much information as possible. Discernment is to gather as much information as possible to determine the best help for another. And so I'll just write this up here. I didn't have a slide, and I highlighted it, reminding me to just write it on a whiteboard if there was one, and Hannah was so good to give me one. So when we're talking about gathering as much information as possible, how are you going to do that? Well, you want to know what to look for, all right? You want to know what to ask. I should probably write that larger. I've got a huge board. And you want to know what to share, okay? And those three things, what to look for, what to ask, what to share, line up with these words, okay? We're talking about observation, investigation, and communication. So if you and I are going to be good about discerning as we help people in need, we want to be good observers, good investigators, and good communicators. When I say communicators, I'm talking about communication with other people who might be in the circuit of benevolence that individual or that family is going to connect with. It would have been nice had we known from some other organization about what was going on with that particular guy before he came in our doors. So just real quickly, I'm not going to spend much time on this, But we've launched a couple of different tools in our city that help us connect. Charity Tracker, JoplinResources.net are the two. And we're really going through some changes with some of that, but right now that is what we have. We've actually connected like 70 different churches, charities, and organizations together on Charity Tracker, an online network sharing tool. You share case management information immediately on this tool. We started that like 12, 13 years ago. Really, the Ministerial Alliance was helpful in that as well. And we got things rolling, and now we have more than 60,000 cases, 60,000 bits of information on people that are in that system. So rarely is somebody going to come into one church or another organization that we don't have at least some information that's going to help us help that person more effectively. That's really important for discernment. So true charity works to investigate. That's a short one. That's it. True charity works to investigate. If you're not taking the time to investigate a little bit so that you can get more information to really help the person in need, you're missing a mark of effective charity. Every Christmas, we're going to move on to the next one. Every Christmas, we have a Christmas shop. So toys, some are donated, some are purchased, and we have these toys that are up in our learning center on these tables, and moms and dads will come up and they will shop for these toys. And rather than going through a line where someone's handing their kid a toy, they're shopping for their own toy, and they have to work in our worth shop for it. And I spent one day as the monitor last Christmas, where I'm up there just kind of monitoring as people are shopping, and to hear the exchanges between parents and people in that room was amazing. When they were like, well, look, hey, honey, this one right here, it costs 45 minutes, and that one right there is 30. What if we came back tomorrow? Could we get those? That's beautiful. See, weighing out economic decisions that you and I have to make every single day, and when they finally say, yeah, let's do that, and they work for them, guess how they feel? Like a parent who can then express right love to a child. They own a gift that they can then give. So this is vital, this idea of entering into exchange, which is the next one. So E is for exchange. And exchange is to employ a person for what he needs. And then in parentheses I put, whenever possible. Okay? To employ a person for what he needs whenever you can. Charities Review stress the importance of work and proclaim that, quote, labor is the life of society, and the beggar who will not work is a social cannibal feeding on that life, end quote. Yeah. And Indiana officials declared that, quote, nothing creates pauperism so rapidly as the giving of relief to able-bodied persons without requiring them to earn what they receive by some kind of honest labor. There's a difference between a person who's poor and struggling and a pauper. Alexis de Tocqueville in the mid-1800s was touring Europe and realizing, especially in England, the detriment of the welfare laws that had been established in 1600. And so many people were dependent on the state, and he said, these are the non-working poor, and he called them paupers instead of the working poor. And so there's a difference there. And I think what I want to do is just read this one page. This is the first page of my notes from this lecture. If we were going to spend an hour on, this like incredibly vital topic of exchange. This is how that lecture kind of starts. Tocqueville said there are two reasons a person will work. Either for survival or to better his position in life. I believe conviction can lead I believe, conviction can lead to a virtuous motive to work, which would be a third. So I think Tocqueville was right. You work because you want to survive or you want to better your position. But I also think by conviction of the Holy Spirit, Paul did not want to be dependent on another, and so he worked out of conviction. So I think there's a virtuous thing that can drive us to labor as well. Regardless of the reason why, it's arguable that as long as work is not unethical, it's beneficial. It challenges the body, the mind, or both. And challenge is the force for development. We already went over that, didn't we? Recent research published in the American Journal of Psychology measured personality changes in 6,000 adults who were unemployed for about 4 years. No work, 4 years. They all showed decline in 3 traits that were measured: conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness. You become oppressed and grumpy when you are not working. Maybe we should think of employment as more than just a positive outcome of our anti-poverty work, but rather a necessary input that would drive healthier outcomes, right? So we think, oh, we want to get in the work of helping people get back to work. How should we do that? Well, maybe start with work on the front end. Because obviously work makes people more conscientious and agreeable and likable. And maybe that will lead toward a path of work. You might also know that a Michigan income dynamics study in 2001 revealed that the welfare poor were statistically more likely to say that they were, quote, inconsolably sad versus the working poor, though they had the same disposable income. It's just not about the cash in your pocket. You can have the same amount of cash in your pocket, but if you're the non-working poor versus the working poor, you're going to be more statistically likely to say, I'm inconsolably sad. That was a large study that was done. Work has value, but it's important to mention it doesn't create it. That's really important. Missions like mine and others that value work can get lost in a bad way. We must be careful that when we begin a discussion dealing with the poor working their way out of poverty, a discussion based on poverty resolution through entrepreneurialism or labor, that we don't confuse the value of work with the value of the person. We're here today, tonight, right, because of the value of the person. And it's not work that creates value, but the recognition of inherent value that inspires work. I want to say that again. It's not work that creates value, but the recognition of inherent value in a person that inspires work. We've discovered that to be true. At our Missions Workshop, we don't require work so that we can esteem a person valuable. We esteem a person as valuable and then wonder, why wouldn't you work? I would say that personal value is less a function of production and more that of potential. Consider a farm acre, 1 acre of farmland. What's its value? I don't know. My dad bought a bunch of acres at $700 an acre. That was a long time ago. I think that's probably a pretty good price. Maybe, Rick? Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe a value of an acre of farmland's $1,000. But if you were to take that same piece of land and uproot it and transplant it on the corner of 7th and Range Line in Joplin, what's its value then? Why? Because the potential is realized there. How does the charity that I'm rendering discover the person's potential? That's important for us to consider. So just a first page of getting into this idea of exchange. I wanted to share that with you. True charity works to avoid one-way handouts. So that's what you would write at the bottom of that one. True charity works to avoid one-way handouts. Oh, I do want to go over the 5 steps to dependency. Some of you know these, but it's really important. A book called Toxic Charity, written by Robert Lupton, and he went over these. He said, listen, if you just hand out stuff to people, it's going to end up hurting them more than helping them. And it's true. If you give something to somebody once, they'll have an appreciation for it. If you give the same thing to them twice, they'll have an anticipation that you're going to do it a third time. Does that make sense? If you do it a third time, they're going to have an expectation that you're going to come back and do it a fourth. It builds up. If you do that a 4th time, they're going to feel entitled to it, even though if you were to ask them, hey, why are you entitled to this? They're going to go, I don't know. All right. Do you feel entitled? Yeah, I do, but I mean, I don't know. Am I entitled? They feel entitled to it because you keep giving it to them. You're reinforcing that, right? And the fifth step is dependency. Now, I think because we live among the poor, that it doesn't just hurt those, our sloppy charity doesn't just hurt the recipients, I think it hurts us too. And here's how. So I developed these 5 steps to paternalism that kind of correspond with these. Well, this person's feeling appreciation. I think the giver, we're feeling, yeah, that felt so good. I had such a good time going down to the mission. And you did, and I want you to come back. I want you to feel that, right? The problem is that if we're not careful, that sense of exhilaration turns into a sense of purpose, which is not bad, right? We have, boy, I came back and he anticipated I was coming and I feel like I've got a purpose now. But then you begin to feel necessary to that person's existence, maybe even essential. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a paternal relationship where you're like, that person's dependent on you and you're having to care for that person, and it's a very unhealthy codependency. It doesn't just hurt the people that are receiving our goods, it hurts us too. We've got to remember that. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up here. We're going to move on now. So I had a focus group of folks who were homeless, and they were at the mission. There were probably about 7 of them. This is years ago. And I'm scratching my head trying to figure out the whole food stamp thing because people are getting fed at the mission, but I know they've got food stamps. And I'm like, well, I don't get that. So I got some cohorts together. There were a handful of us and about 7 homeless folks, and we brought them all together at the table. And we spent like 2 or 3 hours chatting. I was like, okay, so why do you let's just have open conversation. So we kind of set the stage. So we had really good, open, honest dialogue. It's like no threats here. We're not trying to pressure you. We're just kind of curious about some things. We want you to educate us. And boy, they did. Started saying, well, why don't you want to give up food stamps and this, that, and the other? And I said, well, just out of curiosity, what if we gave you cash on the dollar for the food stamps in 6 months? How much would you accrue? Well, it'd be like, like $1,000 or something, okay? $1,000. What if we gave you $1,000 if you just gave over your card right now today? I said, really? I mean, you're getting fed here and you don't want to do that. Why not? They're all looking at each other. It's almost like they gave us the same simultaneous response. We're afraid that if we give them up, we'll never be able to get back on them again. There was this concern about that. It's like they got, this benefit coming, and there was a fear of losing it. And if you are in fear, you are not free. So freedom is F. Freedom is F. Oh, and look at that. I think I've missed a slide. I have. So, freedom is F, okay? Let me read here. Page 112. All right. The goal of charity workers, therefore, was not to press for governmental programs, but to show poor people how to move up while resisting enslavement to the charity of governmental or private masters. Charity leaders and preachers frequently spoke of freedom and showed how dependency was merely slavery with a smiling mask. When I read that out of this book, I was like, boy, I'll never forget that. Dependency is merely slavery with a smiling mask. I go on to share a little bit about how paternalism is merely tyranny with a smiling mask. You got 2 smiling parties in a very unhealthy situation. Dependency was merely slavery with a smiling mask. Minister Joseph Crooker noted that, quote, "It is very easy to make our well-meant charity a curse to our fellow men." Social worker Frederick Almy argued that, quote, "Alms are like drugs, handouts, are like drugs, and are as dangerous, for often they create an appetite which is more harmful than the pain which they relieve." Anybody know who said this? Continued dependence on relief induces a spiritual and moral disintegration fundamentally destructive to the national fiber. To dole out relief in this way is to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. And the answer is, believe it or not, Franklin D. Roosevelt said that. I don't know if he meant that, but he said that. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into it. Boy, so watch for our lunch and learns, because we're going to do freedom. It's an hour long. And I really wish I could take time to share the difference between freedom of experience and freedom of expression. But just let me say this. If you're not free to experience things in a normal, natural cause-effect, sow-reap way, you are not going to be free to express normally. Freedom of expression is absolutely linked. Freedom of experience is absolutely linked to freedom of expression. You have to be free to experience the normal cause-effect relationships of things, of work. And if you're not experiencing the normal experience, then you're going to not be able to have the freedom of expression correctly. Basically what that is like when I was a physical therapist in training, they blindfolded me for a day. Guess how I was expressing myself that day? Totally differently than when I saw. But had anything changed? Nothing but my experience. The freedom of experience and what you experience changes how you act and how you express and how you produce. That's the point between those two. Yes? What is, yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, what is freedom? Freedom is to remove restrictions on expression and experience. Freedom is to remove restrictions on expression and experience. And often our charity is inadvertently restricting experience, like the rewards and repercussions of your own decisions. Okay? So that's it, to remove restrictions on expression and experience. And let's fill out the bottom. True charity works to promote routes out of poverty. True charity works to promote routes or ways out of poverty. That's freedom. We want people to be free from poverty. That's going to be part of the justice. I think for this, we'll just wrap it up here. The last one, G, is God, okay? And when you're talking about faith and charity work, so you could write God is, right? I hesitate to even, but God in charity work is to pray and believe for transformation, okay? So just keeping with the rhythm of things, God is to pray and believe for transformation. To me, that's why the church is so vital in this space of poverty relief work. Because the truth is, we believe in more than poverty relief. We believe in poverty resolution. We believe in prosperity, and not in just a financial way. We believe prosperity holistically, that God can transform a life. I think of scriptures like Philippians 4, where Paul says, I speak not from want. I've learned to be content in all things. I know how to get along with little, and I know how to get along with much. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being well-fed or of going hungry, of having an abundance or suffering need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Do you see the power of faith and how it can totally shatter interior poverty of a person? It's incredibly important. When we do this lecture, I also talk a lot about work and marriage, because those are the two things that research shows you want to help see your community out of poverty or a nation out of poverty. Promote work and marriage, because people who are married and working, they are the least likely to be in an impoverished situation. And that connects, and in the lecture I give, I connect that to faith. So faith really is a bolster to work and marriage.